authentic. So while much of the, quote, ethical secularists claim today for themselves, much of what they say is their own was born out of actually these really horrendous ideologies that they today absolutely refuse to take accountability for, while at the same time, like finger wagging at us. They're quick to blame religious people. Here, I mean principally Christians, be they Protestant or Catholic in this case, who were by and large the sort of bulwark against this the predecessors of modern day secularism. It was the Christians who stopped, or at least presented, the greatest challenge from progressives unleashing on the world programs that were explicitly designed to eliminate certain classes of people. What they're doing today is, while they're trying to brush their own history under the rug, they're simultaneously denigrating ours, when ours, in fact, is more often than not the one that comes out objectively on the right side of history. In my eyes, anyways, it fully vindicates us for going after secularism today on some of the absurd claims that they make, and going after them hard, because we do have a firm foundation historically, objectively, to go after secularism. Now, I can imagine many of you, if you know of the Scopes Monkey trial, or your parents, or especially your grandparents, even more so, this was the narrative that you've been given and that they've been given. It's that, oh, yeah, there was these religious fanatics that tried to keep the truth from being taught in the classroom. If they remember anything about it at all, that's what your grandparents, I'm sure, remembered. And as you could guess, historic reality throw all of that out the window. It's utter trash. So let's go all the way back to the beginning, shall we? In the first, there was no situation where law enforcement came barging into a classroom in real time. What actually happened was much, much more contrived than that. Unlike the fictitious town of Hillsborough, which Inherit the Wind is set in, the real events take place in Dayton, Tennessee. Now, in the years leading up to 1925, the town of Dayton had experienced a major population decline. At the same time, the Tennessee legislature had just passed these laws that had outlawed the teaching of evolution in classrooms. Now, the reason for this is actually quite dense and not as simple as just some dumb hicks in Tennessee with their Bibles, and they just want to get rid of that evolution. There was a debate taking place, which is actually very relevant to the world we live in today, whether or not the states should be responsible for education. People saw rightly that the consequences of that means that the state itself would dictate the curriculums with which may or may not line up with one's personal beliefs or ethics. So if the state is in control of education, that means the state is in control of the curriculum. That means that the state is in control basically of how to propagandize your child. So in an attempt to thwart this, the Butler Act was passed in Tennessee, which stated that it was now against the law to teach any theory that, quote, denies the story of divine creation of man as taught in the Bible, and to teach instead that man has descended from a lower order of animals, end quote. Now, certain legal theorists say that this was simply an attempt to keep man unique among the creatures, and that teachers could say that other animals we're not allowed to say that there was descent with modification per Darwinism, right? Regardless if that be true or not, the key is that the people's concern was over state control of education, which was all the rage at the time in the country. It's its own subject, it's its own story. But as the federal and state governments in the early 20th century expanded their authority in an ever-widening net, this was one of the concerns that people had. And I think here, 100 years later, the people were rightly, no matter what you think about the argument about creation versus evolution, the people were rightly, I think, justified in their hesitancy and their concerns about the state taking over education. So when this law was passed, when the Butler Act was passed, the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, expressed that they would fund any teacher that violated the law. So you have some city officials in Dayton, Tennessee, where the demographic population has been declining, keen to get their city placed on the map again to bring in some business, conspired with a local named John Scopes. John Scopes was a football coach who occasionally acted as a substitute teacher when needed. Scopes agreed with the with the city officials that he would say that he had taught from a certain book called Civic Biology, though he in fact never had. He even went and coached his students to perjure themselves by saying that he had been teaching from this book. Now, right here, I want to pause for a moment because this book, Civic Biology, gets left out of the discussion a lot. Like every time this topic is discussed, it's just, oh, this was all about mind control and these religious bigots keeping people from thinking freely. That's the narrative, right? Well, let's see what they were thinking freely about. Civics Biology, written in 1914 by an ACLU member and teacher named George W. Hunter. It was the standard biology textbook issued by states at the time in the 1920s. Hunter himself was an avid, so keep that in mind, right? That goes back to the first thing we mentioned, right? States taking control of education. This was the standard civic biology textbook issued by states. Hunter himself was an avid supporter of eugenics and racial and class segregation, which places the story square in the center of a wider discussion that we're going to be having on this channel about this period of time. By 1925, we are 60 years removed from Darwin's Origin of Species. Though itself a book really limited in its scope to the study of variations among species, emerging from his ideas came a movement dedicated to societal cleansing by application of a type of artificial selecting for human society. And we're going to get into this in greater detail in a future video, but just now realize that in the 1920s, the social Darwinian idea and the eugenics movement had major backing and support by very wealthy private as well as public funding. Hence the fact that the state was issuing this textbook for teens in high school. So what are some of the things that we find in this book? As an impressionable 13, 14-year-old in 1920 in the state-run school, you would have heard that, quote, from Civics Biology, page 261, when people marry, there are certain things that individual as well as the race should demand. The most important of these is freedom from germ diseases, which might be handed down to the offspring. Tuberculosis, that dread white plague, which is still responsible for almost 1/7 of all deaths, epilepsy, and feeble-mindedness, are handicaps, which it is not only unfair, but criminal to hand down to posterity. The science of being well-born is called the science of eugenics. Next, from page 261 to 263. Quote, studies have been made on a number of different families in this country in which mental and moral defects were present in one or both of the original parents. The Jukes family is a notorious example. In 75 years of progeny of the original generation, it has cost the state of New York over $1.25 million. If such people were lower animals, we would probably kill them off to prevent them from spreading. Humanity will not allow this. We do have the remedy of separating the sexes in asylums or other places, and in various ways preventing intermarriage and the possibilities of perpetuating such a low and degenerate race. End quote. Next, quote, hundreds of families such as those described above today, spreading disease, immorality, and crime to all parts of this country. The cost of society of such families is very severe. Just as certain animals and plants become parasitic on other plants or animals, these people have become parasitic on society. They not only do harm to others by corrupting, stealing, spreading disease, but they are actually protected and cared for by the state out of public money. Largely for them, the poorhouse and the asylum exist. They take from society, but they give nothing in turn. They are true parasites. End quote. He goes on to rank races into 5 categories, from the inferior races to the superior, with whites being on top, of course, and claiming that all of this is backed up by science, none other than Darwinian science itself. So, this is the book we're talking about here. Perfectly innocent and fitting for teens, right? And they're just teaching science, right? That's all. We're just trying to get the truth of science out there. Never mind the um fact that it's wrong. Like this like paradigm of, oh, we just want to teach the science. That's all we're interested in, is teaching the science. The fact that the science is wrong, and you could produce a generation of morally degenerate, um murderous, monstrous people. You have to wonder, like, where did some of the atrocities of the early 20th century come from? Well, and now here you have those backwoods religionists, these backwood hicks. They're trying to stand in the way of this progress. Onwards, comrades. We have to get rid of these religionists. Now, as I stated, Scopes himself had never actually taught evolution, never actually taught from the book. Not that he can remember, anyways, to quote from him. So, along with the students, he's going to perjure himself in this process. He self incriminates himself just to get the lawsuit filed and a trial arranged. And the trial is the state of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes. And from day one, the entire thing is an absolute farce. Now, the chief player of the defense was a man named Clarence Darrow. I just said above, the character that Spencer Tracy plays in Inherit the Wind. They changed the names in Inherit the Wind. It's not a one, but the characters are based on these. The characters in the film are based on these true characters. So the one that Spencer Tracy plays is based on the defense lawyer Clarence Darrow. Clarence was a ACLU man. He had actually debated G.K. Chesterton once in a debate, by the accounts of all that were in attendance. He actually lost the debate to Chesterton. He was himself an agnostic and a eugenicist who told the Washington Times that we should, quote, chloroform unfit children, show them the same mercy that is shown to beasts that are no longer fit to live, end quote. There were really 3 agendas on the map here that they got. 1, challenge the parents who wanted to keep control over what their children's curriculum was in the schools. That's what brought the ACLU's interest there in the first place. 2, to bring attention to Dayton as their population was hemorrhaging. And 3, for Mencken to cover the moronic Christians who live in the South and paint them in the worst light nationally that he could. And they got all 3 of these, at least up until really to today, right? Especially that last one, right? The South and the Christians and the Christian movements and the eugenics movement, of which this was riding along with on the coattails of, and it's sort of the undercurrent of the whole thing, saw this as a public victory for themselves as well.